Hello and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we'll be going over the different tools in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be finishing off the creation tools. The final creation tools we'll be going over are the shape tools. The shape tools are located a ways below the pen tools, but they are very much related to each other, and I will show you why. First, I'll use my rectangle shape tool to make a simple rectangle on my canvas. So, a few things have happened. I made the rectangle, my properties panel has popped up, and there is a new layer in my layers panel called Rectangle 1. So I have a shape layer in my layers panel. But if I go over to my paths panel, you can see that my rectangle shape appears there as well. This is because, like I mentioned before, the pen tools and the shape tools are very much related in that they are all vector objects. What is a vector object? In Photoshop, there are a few different ways to display images. One way is through raster graphics, and another way is through vector graphics. Raster graphics are made up of pixels and are best for real-life photos, whereas vector graphics are mathematical calculations that are best for simple paths and lines, like logos. There are benefits and drawbacks to each, but that's why Photoshop provides us with both of them as options. Since I've already made a vector rectangle, I'll show you what a raster rectangle looks like. I'll switch back to my layers panel, make a new blank layer by clicking the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers panel. Then I'll go up to my rectangular marquee tool and make a rectangle shaped selection. I'm going to fill this with black to match the other rectangle. I'll hit Shift F5 on my keyboard to bring up my fill window. Here I will set my fill to black and hit OK. Then, to deselect this rectangle, I'll just hit Ctrl D. To make sure that we'll remember how to distinguish these two rectangles, I'll go up to the Layers panel and rename this to Raster. Then I'll rename the other layer to Vector. Now I'll select my raster layer and switch to my eraser tool and do some erasing. The raster rectangle is behaving as expected, and the more I use the eraser, the more pixels are being destroyed from its fill. Now, with my eraser tool still enabled, I'll select my vector layer and start erasing. Instead of erasing, a notification has appeared, and it wants me to rasterize the layer before proceeding. This is because this rectangle isn't made up of pixels that we can erase with raster tools. Instead, vector requires you to alter the shape path with vector tools. Now, since vector graphics aren't comprised of pixels, they can serve many applications that raster graphics can't. But the same is true the other way around. That's why we have reason to be happy that Photoshop offers both. Anyways, I'll delete these layers and move on to the next shape tool. I'm just going to right-click the rectangle tool to bring up the shape tool flyout menu and select the rounded rectangle tool. Then I'll click and drag it onto my canvas. Another neat thing about vector shapes in Photoshop is that you have immense control over their properties. If I go up here in the tool options, I have a full bar of buttons to play with. The main ones are the fill, stroke, width, height, and in the case of the rounded rectangle tool, the radius. As you may have guessed, if I go over and click the fill thumbnail, I can change the fill color to whatever I like. But an option you may be unfamiliar with is here in the stroke. I can select another color, and you can see that it basically outlines my rectangle with that color. I can then adjust the size of that outline with this slider. I can also go over here and change the style of the stroke. Then this button on the bottom left affects whether the outline appears outside, inside, or centered onto my shape. The next options are a little more standard, but they're still important. Here I can change the width of my shape, and here I can change the height. Right now, the width and height are unconstrained, operating independently from each other. That's where this button between them comes in. If I select this, and then try to change the width, you can see that now the height follows it, scaling proportionately. And finally, something that sets the rounded rectangle tool apart from the regular rectangle tool is this option, radius. This controls the radius or curve length of the edges. If I decrease the radius, the rectangle will develop harder edges. Whereas if I increase the radius, the rectangle will appear more rounded. I'm going back to the Tools panel again and right-clicking my rounded rectangle tool to bring up the Shape flyout menu. I'm not going to go over all the shape tools Photoshop has, not only for the sake of time, but also because most of them offer the exact same options we just went over. So I'm just going to skip down to the Line tool. One requirement that most paths and shapes have in Photoshop is that they be closed or loop back to their original starting point. The Line tool, on the other hand, lets you make a single line without having to loop it back at all. Using this, you can make free lines using only the stroke as your color. The next shape tool is very special. I'm going to clear the canvas by deleting my current shape layers. Then I'll just right-click the Line tool and hover over the Custom Shape tool. You can see that instead of being a rectangle or a circle or a line, the icon shows an indistinct shape. I'll go ahead and select it. Then just start dragging onto my stage. Look at that! It's an arrow instead. I'm going to go up here in the tool options to this icon next to where it says Shape. Here's a whole bunch of pre-made custom shapes we can choose from. And if we click this gearbox on the right, there's a bunch of sets, each with pre-made custom shapes. And the beauty of these shapes is that we can edit them just like any other path with the vector tools. First off, if we need to select a path, we don't have to go all the way to the Paths panel. If I go over to the Tools panel and select the Path Selection tool, I can use this tool to select any path on a canvas, as long as I have the right layer selected with it. And if I want to select just one of these points, I'll go back to the Tools panel, right-click on my Path Selection tool, and pick the Direct Selection tool. Then I can use this to select and drag any one of these points wherever I want. These aren't the only tools we can use to manipulate paths. If I go back to my Pen tool flyout, I can choose the Add Anchor Point tool. This will allow me to create a new anchor point anywhere along the edge of my path. I can then switch back to the Direct Selection tool to select this point and move it wherever I like. If I decide that I don't like this point or any of the other points, I can go back to my Pen flyout menu, select the Delete Anchor Point tool, and click any anchor point I want to remove. Now, it should be noted that there are other ways to delete anchor points, but they will often break the closed loop of the path and cause problems for you down the road. If you want to delete any anchor points, I strongly recommend using the Delete Anchor Point tool. Finally, there's another path tool I want to quickly show you. I'll select one of these anchor points by first switching to the Direct Selection tool, then selecting a point. Remember these little handles? They control the curve of the line connected to the point. There's a tool that we can use back in the Pen tool flyout called the Convert Point tool. Then, if I use it to click a point with handles, it will remove the handles and make the lines perfectly straight. And the Convert tool also works the other way around. If there's a straight corner that we want to convert into a curve, we can just click that point and drag to create a curve with handles and all. Okay, that will do it for the creation tools. We're going to start going over the workspace tools in the next video.